This is video 3 in the Getting Started series for the solar system blanket. In this video, we're going to talk about using stitch markers and how to work with your increases. Because we're working in the round, this blanket has a series of increases that keep going pretty much every single round, the exception being the bobble stitch round for the asteroid belt later on. But you're going to be using a lot of stitch markers over the entire course of making this blanket. And I wanted to kind of give an overview as to why you're going to be using them and how to use them to your best advantage. So, of course, the very first thing we do is we're going to pick a color to use for a stitch marker to indicate the very first stitch of every round. In this case, it's blue, okay? You can see we got a lot going on here. But this blue stitch marker is always going to indicate to me where the beginning of our round is, okay? So to do that, just pick a color, or whatever kind of stitch markers you're using. It's important for this blanket, unless you want to do a lot of counting and a lot of hard work, the stitch markers make this really easy. So in this case, it's blue. We're just going to keep moving this one up every single round we go. And it's always going to be in the first stitch. You can see we've got two other colors here. We've got a green one and a blue one. A green one and a purple one. And what we're going to do, the reason why we have two different colors here is because we started off with the purples, right? We saw that in video number 1 of our Getting Started series here. But we picked 6 stitch markers in whatever color we wanted. In this case, it was purple. And we used those to mark the increases in that round. So anytime we did an increase, we put a purple stitch marker into the first stitch of that increase. Because an increase is made of 2 half double crochets usually in this pattern, we put the stitch marker into the first stitch of that increase. So if this is your increase, 2 and 1, we put the stitch marker in this one, okay? Because we're working this way. Okay. So that's kind of why we have got the purple ones here. Now the green ones show the increases in the next round. The reason why this is important is because if traditionally when you're working in the round, you can kind of see it starting here. Traditionally, when you're working in the round, patterns will indicate for you to put your increases pretty much right on top of the ones that you did in the previous round, right? So, and that's how the pattern itself for this blanket is written out. I did that so that if you wanted to just keep it easy, keep it simple, you can do that and you can just keep putting them evenly spaced all the way around. They're going to end up right on top of each other. So it's kind of hard to see because of all the stitch markers in the way, but we can see we have an increase on top of an increase, increase on top of an increase. It looks like they're a little off to the side, but that's because we've got these 2 are worked into the first stitch that increased the row before. So they kind of shift just slightly every round, but not very much at all. They're actually going to create kind of this spiral effect. You can kind of see it in the sun right here, right? You're not going to notice this, however, when the blanket's all, said and done. And the reason I say that is because what I recommend is you can kind of see, because we've got our increases worked rounds 1 through 11, basically, all those increases are worked in even increments. As the pattern is written, all the increases are worked on top of the increases from the previous round, right? So that means that our spacing is really even and it's, right on top of each other. And it's basically creating this kind of hexagon effect, right? They're not totally flat sides, but they could be with blocking, right? If I pull these, let me show you on this end. If I pull these 2 corners apart just a little bit, pull this one up just a little bit, you can see that gets kind of flat on the sides here. And that kind of makes it look like a hexagon. Now, it's kind of not the point of this blanket. We're working in the round. We want a circle, right? So I do have a trick to avoiding that kind of hexagon shape. And it's the reason why we're using 2 different colors of stitch markers every round, okay? I've got, let's see, I just finished, this is round 11 here. I'm going to go ahead and finish off round 11 here. Because this is a round where we did a color change, we're doing joined rounds. Right? Remember in video 2, any round you're doing a color change, and the round before that and the round after that are worked using the joined round method. So I'm just going to go ahead and join with a slip stitch and chain 2. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and move this stitch marker out of the way. This is the one I have to move every round. Okay, now it's important to note in this pattern that the chain 2 here does not count as a stitch. Do not count that as a stitch. It's a big no-no. You don't want to do that. What you're going to do is you're going to chain 2 at the beginning of your round. And you're going to insert your hook into that same stitch, that first stitch of the round, and do a half double crochet. That is your first stitch right there. Right there. Okay? This is your first stitch. This chain does not count. So when you're counting your stitches as you go, do not count that as a stitch. Okay? It's very important for this pattern, otherwise your count will be off and you'll get confused like I have been, okay? Trying to save you some grief. Do not count that stitch. Don't count that chain. All right. The same goes for the orbit rounds. When you're doing single crochets and you're only chaining 1, don't count that chain. You don't want to do that. Okay. So we did the first stitch here, and now you can see we did our last increase. I guess the first increase of the last round. We did that in this same stitch, okay? Again, I mentioned that we did for up until now, we've kind of done it so that all of our increases are on top of the ones from the previous rounds, so they kind of all stack up. I'm going to go ahead and change that up a little bit though. To avoid this hexagon shape, I'm not going to put my increases right on top of the last ones. What I'm going to do is I'm going to work some just half double crochets, you know, 1 half double crochet in each of these stitches, just out a little ways as we go. I'm going to work my first increase maybe here instead, right? And then I'll show you how we're going to do that. Again, we're just going to not increase here. Move the stitch marker out of the way just a little bit. And we're just going to do 1 half double crochet in each stitch just for a little ways. Basically until we get just a little bit past the other color stitch marker. In this case, it's purple. Next round, it'll be green. Just going to do a little bit. Right about there looks good. So I'm going to go ahead and work my increase right there. Okay. So you can see my increase is not where we started. It's off to the side just a little bit. Now I'm going to take my purple stitch marker out from round 10. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and place it up here in round 12, and I'm going to do that again in the first stitch of that increase. So right there. There we go. Okay. And then you would just do some more half double crochets until your next increase. You just keep going, keep going. And these stitch markers kind of get in the way, and they're clattery, so bear with me. They do get in the way though. All right, so I'm gonna work, again, I don't wanna work my increase in this same stitch as I did before. So I'm just gonna keep going with my half double crochets, 1 per stitch, just for a little ways. Not too far, but just a smidge, right? Okay, right about there. So I'm gonna go ahead and work an increase in my next stitch, like so. And I'm going to go ahead and take this purple stitch marker from round 10, and again just place that in the first stitch of that increase. It's right about there. Now you can see that my stitches, my increases that my stitch markers are marking, are shifting. My increases are shifting just a little bit every round. And you're going to keep doing that every single round. So next round, you know, we'll get back to here, work all the way around. Get back to the beginning here. We're going to work, in this case, to prep for round 13, we're just going to do a continuous spiral. So you're going to work, you know, in the first stitch of your round and just keep going. But you're going to work your next increase, not at the beginning here, but maybe just after that one. And the next round will be just after that one. And so you'll kind of work around and around and around. And if you get to a point where your stitch markers are, you know, kind of close to the beginning of your round, or close to the end of your round, I should say, you can always start over, you know. you're shifting them over just a little bit every round, and there's obviously not enough space to do that. You have 6 increases every round, and you're eventually going to run out several times over the course of this blanket. You're going to have to just kind of start over at the beginning. And what I mean by that is, say, we've decided to start over at the beginning. For our next round, we'll go ahead and put our first increase in that first stitch, and then evenly space the other ones out. And that is a good time for you to start counting your rounds. I can tell you that when I've started doing this stitch marker method here, I've stopped counting my rounds. I've stopped counting the number of stitches that are in every single round. There are so many stitches in this blanket. I haven't even done the math yet. It's so many. But working on the round, you kind of got to keep those increases at semi-even increments. They don't have to be exact, as long as they're kind of roughly placed. It'll work out just fine shape-wise. But it'll help you keep track of your counting a little bit. You won't have to stress about counting every single stitch every single round. It'll drive you mad. But the stitch markers really help with that. And when you are ready to go ahead and move your stitch markers back so that you start your increase at the very beginning of your round again, you can use that as a counting round, just to double check and make sure you got the right number of stitches. The pattern is written so that the number of stitches you should have in that round is written at the very end in parentheses. So, for instance, at the end of round 12, we're supposed to have 72 stitches. That's a lot of stitches to count. It says for round 12, you do a half double crochet increase, and then you half double crochet in the next 10 stitches. So you'd know that, increase 10, increase 10, increase 10. If you put your stitch marker at the beginning of the round, that would be your increase. Then you'd count 10, and then you do an increase, and then you'd count 10, and so on and so forth. I found that it's important, if time consuming, to occasionally do that, just so you can keep track and count and make sure you're on count. And you can adjust if needed. If you have too many stitches, you can sneak in a decrease somewhere, or skip an increase. Just don't do the increase. If you have, one extra stitch, just go back to your last increase, take it out, and don't do the increase. If you need extra stitches, you can put, a couple extra increases snuck in there. So it's a very forgiving pattern, as long as you make sure you're moving your stitch markers as you go. And again, to avoid that hexagon shape, just shift them over every round just a little bit. And that's why we're using the 2 colors. We can kind of track and keep track of what the last round was, where the stitches were for the last round, and where our ones for this round are. And that's going to let us, move the stitch markers up every single round and keep track of that as we go. I think that is everything. Again, that's going to be really helpful when you get to, say, round, I don't know what round 106 has. I think it's, you do an increase and then you do 104 stitches, and then you do an increase and then 104 stitches. That's a lot of stitches to count, right? So again, just keep moving your stitch markers over every now and then. The reason why we're using 2 different colors again is for the visual effect. You can see, I moved my stitch markers over about yay much last round. I'll do that again here, and I'll do it again here, and again here, and again here. And you can kind of keep them semi-even. You can keep track, make sure you have 6 increases in every round, and then you just work 1 stitch in every stitch of the round, aside from the increases. So if you're stressed about counting, that's kind of my stitch marker counting avoiding technique. But again, it is a good idea to randomly, do a row where you're counting. It kind of sucks, but it's important to make sure that you're not totally off base with your number of stitches in every round. And again, if you're doing joined rounds, don't count that chain. You can see here's our chain, right? You're going to want to not count that as a stitch. So when you do your next round and you're working continuous spirals, you're not going to work your next stitch for the continuous spiral right there. You're actually going to work it right here. Okay? You're going to do that in wherever your first stitch marker is, that's where you're going to put that stitch. Okay? Otherwise, don't do what I did. Don't stress yourself out. Don't count 1,010 times. Just make sure you're moving the stitch marker up. Use these stitch markers, and it's going to help you out an awful lot along the way. Hopefully this video and the other videos explained probably more detail than you needed some of the tips and things that I've used to make this blanket. But if you have any questions, do leave a comment in the comment section of this page, and I'll go ahead and respond to your question as soon as I can.